Hey, happy Thursday night to everyone as we get ready for a big weekend of SEC football. Hello, I'm Stephen Willis, and this is the Biscuits and SEC Week 3 college football preview, and I'm here with the Hammer. And we're going to talk about the big games of the weekend and plus the storylines that are going on. How are you doing, Hammer?
Stephen, I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having us again. Looking forward to a good week. Although some people say it's a little light, but I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, people need to just chill out because 4 weeks ago we were watching Little League baseball.
Exactly.
All right. Sorry about that.
No, you're good, man.
Let's go ahead and get started and talk about the first big game of the day. It's Tennessee at Florida. Tennessee has not won in Florida since 2003. Tennessee has clearly the better team right now, but I don't know if it's just a situation where I can pick Tennessee. I think I'm going to pick Florida until Tennessee proves they can win down there. I think Tennessee has lost by two Hail Marys at the end of the game down in Gainesville. I just don't know if they can turn this around.
Yeah, so I'm with you. I've been waffling on this game all week, right? So last year, this win early in the season for Tennessee was huge, just because, like you said, they're kind of cursed against Florida. However, it was in Knoxville, and it's in the Swamp this year. So a much bigger test for Tennessee. Joe Milton, we'll see how he does on the road. I think he's operated the offense well so far, but certainly not at the heights of Hendon Hooker, which, I think is a little too lofty of expectation anyway for him to get back to that level. But this will be a big test for him. I think I'm going to lean Tennessee to win here, but not cover. I think it's a very close game. It's going to come down, to the end. Kind of low scoring too. I think Florida's defense showed me something against Utah to not give up when they were on the field all day. And I don't know. It was a backup quarterback from Utah, so it's hard to say, but I think it's going to be a classic SEC test, right, where it's 4 quarters of football. I like Tennessee to edge them out, but it's going to be close.
Yeah, it should be quite interesting. I mean, all the Steve Spurrier jokes and all the things that he did over the years, the needling that he did to Tennessee. I think the quote that I saw this week, maybe from you guys, maybe from that SEC podcast, was Tennessee is like that roadkill on the side of the road. It may twitch every now and then, but trust me, it's dead. And Spurrier's just great. And I mean, he's just basically, you talk about people that get into heads, and Florida is just in Tennessee's head. There's been many times when Tennessee has had the better team and has walked out of the swamp with an L.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, I'm not sure Billy Napier's Steve Spurrier, so we'll have to see if he can continue that. It really should be a good game. I mean, we've only seen 2 weeks of football, right? I'm sure we were guilty of it after week 1, seeing what happened to Florida. They're not going to be great. I'm pretty certain of that, but they could still be a good team. There's a lot of football left, so I wouldn't be surprised to see them come out. It's a big home game and get the crowd behind them and make this a really competitive one.
Yeah, it should be interesting as well. My Alabama people are coming on here. They watch the Tide Talk Live, and they do the SEC After Dark. They're also tuning in for this live stream as well. So good evening, Rick and Bonnie. We move on to the next game, and this next game is interesting to me, and it's interesting to me on a couple of levels. First of all, Mississippi State against Arizona looked pretty good in the first half. Jaquavius Marks looked like a dude. Will Rogers, not so much, but we'll get into that in just a second. LSU has problems in the secondary. If Will Rogers can't make that secondary work, it doesn't matter because LSU's front 7, nasty. I don't know if you can just count on the fact that you're going to run the ball on LSU. I think you're going to have to throw to beat them. And it's weird to think about that Will Rogers is coming from a year in the air raid. And now you're like, well, can Mississippi State throw the ball enough to deal with a suspect secondary? It's just bizarre.
It's totally bizarre. And like you said, a total flip-flop, right? So I was looking at the stats earlier when I was writing our preview for this game. Will Rogers through 2 games has thrown the ball 46 times, which sounds like one game, for what he used to do under Mike Leach's air raid. And they, I believe, have ran the ball 78 times. So they're running the ball like 60% of the time. And to your point against Arizona, that kind of stopped working, and they didn't really have much of an answer, surprisingly. Arizona, I believe, turned the ball over 4 times to Mississippi State's 1 last week, and that game still goes to overtime. So you win the turnover battle by that much, but you can't really convert it into points. So, it's an interesting game. That matchup, like you pointed out, right? What is Will Rogers going to be able to do when LSU forces them to throw the ball in this new offense? He's shown he's capable of it in years prior, but it's just a new system, and clearly so far they don't think that I guess he's that comfortable.
Yeah, SEC Stat Cat, I think that's his name. He's the guy that does the advanced statistics. Is like Will Rogers is like last in the SEC and throws over 10 yards downfield of the ball in the air. And all of the stuff that we made fun of Will Rogers previously about is still happening. They're throwing the ball less. It's becoming a liability. My hot take hammer that maybe you didn't hear that I've talked about on SEC After Dark is that Mike Wright is the starting quarterback by the Egg Bowl. And that is still in play.
Dang, that is quite a hot take. It's absolutely in play, though. Like you said, I mean, it's new coach, new coordinator, new system. If Mike Wright's a better fit, then he's going to end up getting the ball. And I think this week's going to go a long way to figure that out. It's a home game. LSU looked suspect in week 1. They played Grambling week 2, so hard to say, right? So, the jury's out on both of these teams, but certainly Mississippi State here has a lot to prove, just being the home team and this coaching staff wanting to establish themselves. So it should be really interesting. I do think Mississippi State will be able to keep it competitive. I think their defense is pretty solid. It kind of just, to me, it's a quarterback battle, right? If Jaden Daniels plays well on the road and is able to get the ball and push it downfield accurately, I think LSU will win. And then on the flip side, we've already talked enough about Will Rogers. So if he can put something together, because they're going to need him, they'll keep it close. But I'm not sure Mississippi State, has the horses here. As we just mentioned with Florida, I think LSU is a team that, they got whooped in week 1 by a good team. But I do think they're still good, and they're going to figure some things out, similar to how they did last year, where they have some hiccups early, but still a good football team.
Yeah, my question with LSU is in the back end of the defense. And that if you have a secondary playing against people that can expose you, that is going to be problematic. Right. Like against Florida State, Keon Coleman and Johnny, I forget his last name. The big 6'7" wide receivers. That was a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, they're going to play teams in the SEC West, namely Ole Miss, namely Texas A&M. Those dudes are still coming up on the schedule. There's lots of teams in the SEC West that have the athletes on the outside to make a secondary like that hurt for LSU. And my point is, it's like this LSU team might be a 7-5, 8-4 team. They could be plenty good, but they just have that one Achilles heel that there's just 2 or 3 teams that can completely take advantage of that.
Yeah, and I think you could say that, at this point, I could see that happening to most teams in the West. I really don't know just 2 weeks in who is head and shoulders above. You could make a case, for certain teams, but at the end of the day, I think it's going to be a really competitive and really tight division race on that side, with, Georgia being on the others, not very close. But I think the West will be really fun and really competitive.
All right, let's go to the next game, South Carolina and Georgia. Now, this game, South Carolina, their offensive line struggled to block Furman. Furman had somewhere near double-digit tackles for loss against South Carolina, which means, A, Spencer Rattler's having a good year and is much better year than we assume he's having, and B, they're not going to do well against Georgia.
No, they're not. I think the spread on this is right around 4 touchdowns, and I think that's pretty accurate. I mean, South Carolina just has a lot of holes. Shane Beamer, so far in his tenure there, has done an excellent job. They've exceeded, their expectations and Vegas win totals the last couple of years. But it's still an uphill battle. And when they go up against a team like Georgia, who doesn't have much weaknesses and is very buttoned up, that's kind of when they get exposed, right? They just, especially on the offensive line, they don't have the guys that are going to be able to block. And Spencer Rattler's going to be running for his life, unfortunately.
Yeah, and defensively, South Carolina is not very good. South Carolina might be low key the 13th team in the West, and everybody, because they beat Tennessee, because they beat Clemson, because they went to the Gator Bowl, everybody thinks they're more than they are. I am actually, I don't know if Vandy's not better than South Carolina at this point. If there's offensive line problems, like I think there's offensive line problems, I don't think you can guarantee that South Carolina is going to beat Vandy, even though the game is going to be in Columbia.
I totally agree. I mean, I guess we'll see as the season continues what the North Carolina defensive line looks like, although, App State seemed to block them a lot better in week 2 than South Carolina could in week 1. But, yeah, that performance, I mean, look, North Carolina, again, we'll see what their defensive line is this year. Last year, they were not good. They had a horrendous defense. So to see what they did to South Carolina in week 1 was really eye-opening. And to your point, there are many SEC defensive lines that I think are better than North Carolina. Certainly have more talent, at least on paper, than what North Carolina does. So as long as they are executing well, whenever they see South Carolina on the schedule, they're just going to tee off because South Carolina can't run. And if they can't run, you get them in 3rd and long and get them behind the sticks, and it's just everybody pins their ears back and runs downhill.
Yeah, I think Tennessee and Clemson, they're kind of licking their chops right now at what South Carolina could be as well. I think Georgia, this is a situation. It's like, hey, in a good day, going against that Georgia defense, you score 10 points. The question is, can Georgia score 38? And that's a legit question because offensively, they've started off slow as the beginning of the season happened. And I don't know if it's a Mike Bobo thing. I don't know if it's a Carson Beck thing, maybe a running back. I'm not 100% sure what is going on there, but something has to wake up Georgia because they are the team that's carrying the flag for the SEC at the moment. And you can't count on Alabama. You can't count on LSU. I don't know if you can count on Ole Miss, but those are the next tier below Georgia. Georgia has to be that team that is just unbeatable looking, and I don't know if that's the team this year.
I don't know either. But I think we're going to find out at least a little bit more this Saturday, right? So this is their SEC opener. They've played nobody. Their schedule is extremely easy, even in SEC play a lot of weeks, this one included, right? I mean, you're a 4 touchdown favorite over a conference opponent. It's just a testament to what Kirby Smart has built. So to your point about them, being a little, we'll just say sluggish on offense to start the season. I think we're going to see a much more polished operation this Saturday. Kirby likes to beat up on South Carolina. He's done it, I think, every year that Shane Beamer has been there. So I expect them to look sharper. And if they're not, then I think it really kind of falls onto Carson Beck, right? And at that point, I'm sure he'll get several more weeks of work. But to me, it's kind of like, we have all the ingredients here. We saw what Stetson Bennett was able to do. If we're really not operating efficiently here, they have depth at quarterback, and they could go to somebody else if Beck isn't getting the job done.
And those are the main 3 games of the weekend. A lot of people are going to complain about football. Like I said, 4 weeks ago, we were watching the Little League World Series, and we were excited about it. Do not complain about football. And weekends like this gets a little bit squirrely. And one game where I don't know if it has a chance to get squirrely. So Alabama fans in the thread, don't hear me saying that. But Alabama has this week to get stuff fixed because it gets real for them next week. It honestly got real before the Texas game, but they messed that one up. Now in conference play, what's going on? The Ole Miss game is the start off, and this is the get right game. Is the answer Jalen Milroe?
Man, I don't think so personally. I think Jalen Milroe, outside of very serious improvement in the downfield passing game, is not a guy who's going to get you to where Bama wants to go, right? Meaning Atlanta for the SEC title, college football playoff berth. Is he a guy that can win 8, 9, 10 games? Yeah, I could see that. But I think you saw his limitations against Texas, right? Where you're playing a really good team who can match you athletically and physically in most positions. You need to have a difference maker at quarterback in those games. And on that night, it was Quinn Ewers, and Jalen Milroe was really a detriment. I mean, those 2 turnovers are pretty inexcusable. He hit some nice deep balls, but I think overall he's not very comfortable in the pocket. He's bailing out too quickly, and again, isn't somebody that you can win and get to the level that Alabama wants to get to. So I don't think he's the answer, and I'm interested to see what happens, this weekend against a lesser opponent in South Florida, because Nick Saban even mentioned, I believe in his post game or maybe his Monday presser this week, that he did, consider going to, I guess, Buckner or Simpson or one of the backups against Texas. It just, they were close enough, right, to where it was never really, I guess, a good time with them being down 1 score until the final 5 minutes or 4 minutes whenever Texas hit that long touchdown. So I don't think he's the answer long term, and I'm fascinated to see this week if we do see, somebody else take some snaps.
And I'm going to be honest about this, and Alabama fans might get on to me about this and say, Steve, you don't know what you're talking about, but I would not go to Buckner. Buckner would not be the number 2. I would go to Ty Simpson. I would turn it over to him, and I would say, hey, be A.J. McCarron. Just don't turn the ball over. Protect it. And go in there and let these guys that are athletes all over the field be athletes all over the field for you. You do not have to be Tua. You do not have to be Mac Jones. You don't even have to be Jalen Hurts. If you are just A.J. McCarron, we will be fine and we'll probably win the SEC West. Now, here's the other thing. Jalen Milroe and the Jalen Milroe that I saw, he was a worse version of Blake Sims. That's what he was out there playing ball. And I don't know if Alabama keeps Jalen Milroe as the quarterback long-term this season. I do think that Alabama will end up in the Dukes Mayo Bowl or the Music City Bowl, and Alabama fans will be losing their mind.
Yeah, I agree. We just talked, earlier about how competitive the West is going to be. I don't think Milroe is a guy that's going to go in there and win a bunch of these games, especially too. I mean, look, I guess what I thought too, one of my takeaways from that Texas game is, look, if you want Milroe, if Milroe's the best quarterback and he's your starter, that's fine. But it seems like they could tailor the offense to him a little better, right? He's such a weapon with his legs. They didn't have a ton of designed runs. It just seemed like, they were trying to run, I guess, the typical Alabama offense where there is a lot of, downfield shots, play action. You're expected to be able to push the ball downfield from the pocket, and that's not his strength. That's not his skill set. So I'm kind of with you. I don't really understand the Buckner move to begin with because, Tommy Rees had already replaced him at Notre Dame with Sam Hartman before he left for Alabama, and ultimately Buckner ended up there too. So it's not like, Buckner is this all-world stud waiting to be unleashed. So we'll see, but it's something to watch, because if they can't get it figured out, then they're vulnerable.
It's the most bizarre situation that I've seen in Alabama football since Saban's been there.
I totally agree. Yeah.
It just does not seem like something that should be happening in Alabama.
Yeah,
Eh,
I mean, who
eh,
knows? Maybe by the end of the year they'll be on the freshman Lonergan, I think is
yeah.
his name. Who you know you've heard good things of, but he's obviously a true freshman, so they don't think he's ready.
Yeah, it's my thing at Ole Miss is if Ole Miss for some reason drops the game at Alabama and they drop the game at LSU and the season is like kind of at the point where like Music City Duke's Mayo Bowl, play Walker Howard and get him ready for 2024. That's what I would do if I was Ole Miss.
Right.
So
Yeah. We'll see if Saban and company have to make that call, and if they do, if they're able to make it, because I don't know that would be an interesting move for sure.
yeah, starting at about midnight Saturday night, I think the Alabama fans in the thread should remember that I'm going to become unbearable for about a week. So I apologize in advance. But I do think Alabama is going to cover. But the way this plays, Saban wants to play the offense that he played back in 2011, which means there's a chance that Alabama wins this game 31-3. It's an absolute mauling, but that's not a cover.
Yeah, you're right. Look, to me, it's almost on principle. You just Bama coming off a loss, you bet them to cover. But at the same time, there's a lot of principles, I guess, that we've come to know about Alabama that this so far this year and maybe a little bit of last year seem to be potentially unraveling. But if I had to put money on this, I would say Alabama will cover. But to your point, I could see them running the ball because they didn't run very well against Texas, so they want to get that into a good place heading into conference play. So I could really see them running the ball, running the clock, and just getting out of there with, like you said, a 28 4 touchdown win and getting back to Tuscaloosa.
And good for Alex Kalesh. I mean, he obviously knows how to move the ball in Alabama because he did that last year. So we'll see with South Florida. South Florida doesn't have the dudes. Y'all are playing in, I guess it's still Raymond James, the stadium down in Tampa. I'm going to Tampa tomorrow. Tomorrow's kind of an off day for me. So I will be spending in Tampa. Tampa's my favorite city in America. I love Tampa. Yeah. IMG's like an hour down the road from Tampa. Ole Miss has a commitment in Clearwater. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on in Tampa. But trying to think, Missouri and Kansas State before we get out of here.
Yeah.
That line is only like 5.5 points. And I just look at that and I was like, that feels like a sucker line because Kansas State beat them by 5 touchdowns last year. And it wasn't that close. And this is the North Dakota state system that has been ingrained in Kansas State at the moment. And I just expect Kansas State to kind of go in there and maul them because Missouri barely beat Middle Tennessee.
Yeah, I know. I think, look, if you are expecting Mizzou to win this one, I would say it's like you're just kind of betting on some vibes that they can pull out a win at home and get revenge from last year. Because, right, what we've seen on the field, Kansas State hasn't played anybody. So you're kind of going off of last year. I mean, Troy and Southeastern Missouri, I don't know what to make of them. Troy sometimes has a solid team, but who knows? So you almost, like you said, you expect Kansas State to be good. I think the one thing I love about Kansas State, frankly, is they always, to me, just seem to get the most out of what they have, right? They play hard, they're tough, they're disciplined, they don't kill themselves, and they're just a tough team to beat. And that, to me, is just a team that beats Missouri because Missouri does find ways to beat themselves. They have silly turnovers. They make silly mistakes, at least under Drinkwitz so far in his tenure. So I'm kind of with you. I mean, it's an SEC team at home, so it's hard for me to say take the points. But that's probably where I would lean right now just because I trust Kansas State to execute their game plan, to be smart, and I don't trust Missouri to do that just yet. And I don't trust their quarterback. I think Walker Howard at Kansas State is much better than Brady Cook. So I like them in this matchup.
Yeah, it absolutely bizarre. Now, real quick, we're only 2 weeks into the season, so I preface that we're only a sixth of the way through that, and no team has played a conference game at this point. So that's the beginning. But who can win the SEC West?
I think Alabama, of course. I think you have to still say LSU based just on what they did last year. I wouldn't count out Ole Miss, and that's probably it. Some people will say A&M. Obviously, I went to A&M. I don't think they are a team that you can count on to do that.
What happened to that A&M secondary?
I have no idea.
Because that was the strength. That's what they did last year. Last year it was run defense was the problem.
Right. So I'm starting to think, and I've seen this thrown out, on Twitter in various places, that part of the reason A&M's pass defense last season was so good is because their run defense was so bad and teams were just running the ball down their throat rather than throwing. So it's possible there's a little bit of that going on. Beyond that, we could go all day about the issues A&M had. I will say, when it comes to the secondary, as bad as they looked, a lot of that was simply bad tackling, right? Whether they can fix that or not is up in the air. But they had, it was like something crazy, 250 yards after the catch, which is absurd. And there was plenty of arm tackles and guys throwing shoulders out of control and not wrapping up downfield. So, I think at a minimum, as an A&M fan, you just hope they can fix that part of it, right? If we've got some guys that can't cover very well, then we'll just have to try to do what LSU's doing and kind of roll with Band-Aids and duct tape on the back end. But as long as they can get guys to the ground after they make a catch, maybe they'll have a fighting chance. But I do think, like I said, I don't think that's a team you can rely on. They could beat anybody on the schedule, but they have also proven they can lose to anybody on the schedule. So when it comes to what teams do you think can win the West, I don't think there's enough there of, positive momentum to where you think they can run the SEC schedule or have one loss, which I think is, probably what it would take. If somebody wins it with 2, then that would just be all-time chaos year.
Yeah. Connor Weigman, absolutely balling. Those wide receivers are really good. It feels like with Bobby Petrino, they're going to figure out how to get everything done. And they just need to figure out a way to create explosives or turnovers or sacks, just to occasionally give the offense an additional possession. I think that's going to be important for A&M moving forward.
Yeah, I would agree. I think Weigman's looked great. He was under duress all game against Miami, stood in the pocket, made tough throws. I have nothing bad to say at this point about the offense. Like you said, I think Petrino's done his job. I think he's, they're going to probably continue to get better as they get more comfortable there. It's just a matter of, you got to play all 3 phases. A&M missed a couple field goals. Like they just can't get out of their own way in a lot of aspects. And so, I don't think they can be really relied upon, like I said, to make a serious push. Now, could they ruin somebody's season and beat somebody? Absolutely. But consistently, I just don't think they're there yet. And, who knows? Some of the other teams we mentioned might not be there yet either, right? I mean, here we are heading into week 3, A&M, LSU, and Bama, who I think preseason-wise, Vegas were probably the top 3 favorites to win the West, all have an out-of-conference loss. So we could be headed for an all-time just wacky chaos season in the West.
Yeah, before A&M, well before A&M came into the league, back in the late 90s, Arkansas, Mississippi State, LSU just kind of alternated. People going to Atlanta because Florida and Tennessee, those were the big dogs in the conference at that point in time. So it looks like this year could look a little bit like that. I mean, that's good news for me. That's probably good news for you as well. It's probably bad news for LSU and Bama.
I think so. I just think, even the teams that I didn't name that could actually win it, I do still think, they can be competitive and they can ruin somebody's season, right? Arkansas is not to be looked down on with the weapons they have. Mississippi State, if they can figure out a passing game, I think is going to be a tough team. I still think they have a pretty solid
Still bizarre
defense.
to say that out loud.
What's that?
Still bizarre to say that out loud.
Yeah, it is. I mean, things have totally turned on their head. You got A&M can't defend the pass, but their offense looks good. Mississippi State doesn't know how to pass. It's just
Quinshon Judkins is averaging 3 yards a carry.
Yeah, I mean, there you go. Ole Miss is having trouble running the ball, yet Jackson Dart looks, like an all SEC QB. Yeah. It's a brand new year.
Yeah, it's absolutely nuts.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks everybody for tuning in. This has been the Biscuits and SEC Week 3 preview. For Hammer, I'm Stephen Willis. Thank you all, everybody, for joining us. Next week, Alex will be back, and we will talk about, Ole Miss and Alabama. Speaking of the Alabama people in the stream. So we'll have some stuff to talk about next week. So tune in for that. It's about 8:15, 8:30 on Thursday night Eastern, 7:30 Central. But until then, we'll see you later. And thanks, man.
All right. Thanks, Steven. Appreciate it.